Hey everyone, and welcome to my channel. My name is Rebecca Austin, and on this channel we talk about all things Kajabi marketing and growing your online business. Now, if you're new to my channel, I welcome you to subscribe and hit that bell notification so that you will know of all the latest videos as we release them. In this video, we are going to talk about the live webinar pipeline. One of the things that we like to do is talk about things about Kajabi and the technicality, and then I also like to talk about strategies and marketing and ways to be able to look mindset-wise on your business. Recently, I had someone who commented on a recent video. Thank you, Karen, so much for your comment. And she specifically asked me to create a video about creating live webinars inside Kajabi. Now, Karen, thank you so much for your question. This is a really great question, and it's one that I get pretty frequently, especially because webinars are a super popular way of using as an opt-in or a lead generation tool if it's done effectively and correctly. And there's a lot of different strategies behind it. There's a lot of different ways you can do webinars, and I dive deeper into that in my Digital CEO Pro Academy. So if you're interested in more detailed information about webinars, the strategy behind them, and all those kind of things, you can definitely check them out. It's found on my website. Now, for live videos, there are a couple different ways that we can do this inside Kajabi. So for this video, I'm going to walk you through the really simple basic way to set up a live webinar in Kajabi. And then on my next video, I'll dive a little bit deeper into a more advanced version of doing a live webinar in Kajabi where we access YouTube Live and can have some commenting and stuff like that, rather than the basic version, which is incorporating with a third-party integration such as Zoom or Webinar Jam, GoToMeeting, all of those kind of different third-party softwares that we use for the actual hosting of the webinar. Because one thing that you want to remember is that with Kajabi, we can do all of the different aspects as far as our content management and the sales process and the flow and the emails and all those kind of things that are leading up to and after our live webinar. But the webinar itself, if it's going to be live, does need to be hosted on some type of other platform. So that other platform can be just simply Zoom, or like I said earlier, we can do something a little bit more along the lines of like a YouTube Live. But either way, it does still need to be hosted on an outside platform. Now remember, that is with our live webinars. If you're doing a pre-recorded webinar though, everything can be done inside of Kajabi, because simply then a pre-recorded is simply a video, and then we can just drop that into a video block. Okay, so that being said, let's jump on into the specifics of setting up a live webinar inside Kajabi. All right, so let's get logged in, and I'll get my screen up here, and we'll start with, okay. So we are logged into our Kajabi account, and normally what you can do, there's two different ways that we can do this on setting up a live webinar pipeline. I like to do it in a pipeline simply because there are so many steps to the webinar itself, as far as that whole flow and the process. First of all, remember, we have our registration page. So we have the option for our audience to actually learn about the webinar. We want to dive deep into the value proposition that you're offering inside the webinar, whether it's paid or free. It doesn't really matter. Either way, your registration page is essentially like a mini sales page or an opt-in page for your lead magnet, which in this case is a webinar. So we have our registration page, and then inside that registration page, or in Kajabi essentially it's separately, but we have it connected then to a form, an opt-in form, where then that you can gather that person's information for them to register for the event or register for the live webinar. If it's a paid webinar, however, you do want to do this in a checkout page with an offer. So it's going to be pretty much a similar process. It's just going to be through an offer and checkout page versus a form opt-in if it's free. So either way, we have our registration page, then we have our form or opt-in, and then for a live event, we need to have a event set up inside Kajabi, which is triggering in the system a specific date and time for that live webinar. So we want to set up the event, and then we will probably have a registration confirmation page or a thank you page, welcome page, however you want to word that. So we have that confirmation page that pops up after they opt in or purchase. And then we'll have our email sequence that goes along with the pre-event emails to remind them, keep them excited, make sure that they actually show up. And then our after-event emails. And then from there, we will have the sales process, because remember, our webinar is simply an entry point on our progression of inviting them to actually purchase with us. So the next thing then is to have your sales page and your offer and your product for the part that they're actually purchasing from you. So with all of those moving pieces and those parts, a lot of times it's a lot easier to set it up inside a pipeline. Now the cool thing is that Kajabi does have, if we go to new pipeline in here, they already have a webinar OVO. Now it says Zoom, but it doesn't have to be Zoom. This could be any third-party link that you are using for your third-party integration for the delivery of the live webinar itself. You can use this template if you want to. Now, if we click on the Zoom webinar OVO pipeline, you'll notice that it gives us kind of an outline here of all the different pieces that this pipeline template is going to create for us. And what that is that you'll have a registration page. As I talked about, we have the then form for them to register, the confirmation page. There's emails prior to and after the event that we set up a specific event, and then your sales page and checkout page. Now, what I recommend, however, now if you're first getting started and you like working off a template, you can definitely just click create pipeline and just start building inside this template that is already set up for us. However, one thing to keep in mind is that right now, at least at the time of recording this video, the pipelines themselves are still in the Premier template as far as the Premier page builder. And if you want to have some of the really awesome new design features that are available in the new Encore page builder, you're not going to be able to do that if you just set up the pipeline, unless you just set up a separate page and then drop it into your pipeline. So honestly, what I would recommend is that if you want to, you can go to this page here, take a screenshot or write down these elements and then start creating them yourself and then drop them into a separate pipeline. I hope that makes sense for you, but it just will give you a lot more design flexibility, because remember, a pipeline is simply an organized folder, so to speak, of elements that have been created inside Kajabi that puts them all together to make it easy for us to manage and to navigate and to look at analytics and all those kind of things. But they don't necessarily have to be all inside the pipeline. And they're really, each individual pieces of that pipeline are separate in and of themselves. If you want more information about pipelines and how to use pipelines and navigate pipelines, check out some of my other videos that I have done specifically on pipelines to help kind of clear that up for you on how pipelines are set up. But what we want to do here is set up a live webinar pipeline, and to enjoy all of the great design benefits of Encore, we're going to create a registration page, a confirmation page, an event, our form, and then your sales page and checkout page for the actual purchase after the webinar. Okay, so if you want to create pipeline, that's fine too. But for the sake of this video, I'm just going to go ahead and create each one of these elements. That way, then it'll give you the opportunity to see how easy that is. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do then is we're going to go back to our pages, and we're going to create a new page. And honestly, I mean, you can start with some of these design templates down here if you want to, but remember, this is a registration page, so it's entirely up to you. For me, what I like to do on any time I'm creating a new page is I will start with just any page. It doesn't really matter, because we're going to do this as webinar registration. And start kind of from scratch. Now, if you have already created a page template, which if you looked at any of my other videos, I always recommend creating a page template, which has your branding on the header and your footer and your menu set up the way you want it, your color scheme, your fonts, the favicon, all the various settings. And if you have that set up as a page template, then anytime you want to create a new page, instead of having to go back and create all of those things, you simply go to your page template and clone it. So it's a really great side tip to be able to help you with saving a ton of time in the long run. So, but I don't have that in this particular practice account that I'm using here. So in that case, we're just going to start from scratch. But essentially what we do then is we can just kind of go through and delete all the segments that are here in this initial page, because personally I like to kind of start from scratch where I'm not relying on the outline that they've set up for us. So we simply go to these three little dots next to each section and then click on delete. So now you can see where I basically, all I have is my header and footer. Now, if you don't have a page template set up, consequently, you could then edit this header footer the way you want to, save as a page template, then clone it and start your registration page. But anyway, so for the sake of time on this video, we're just simply, rather than spending a bunch of time on design, we're just going to maybe start off with a hero with video. This will be our introduction video where we're going to talk about, you know, what the webinar is, engagement, all that kind of stuff. Our action will be to go to the two-step opt-in or to section on the page if you want to, because then we can have the next section of the page can be the opt-in form. But we don't have a form set up yet for this particular webinar. So then the next thing that we'll do is open a new tab and set up our Kajabi, where we then go into our forms. Since this is a free webinar, create a new form, and here's where we're going to do webinar. Obviously, you're going to name that more specifically for what you want it to be. And then we can now add any additional form fields that we want. This is where I have a whole separate video that talks about how to do multiple date and time selections. So if you're going to do a webinar and you want them to choose between more than one date and time, we can do that in the form fields and set up those options. So watch that video if you want to do a live webinar where you give them multiple dates, and I'll put a link to that video in the description and probably one of those little options up above. But essentially, this is where you can create your form. We want to add whatever additional information we want to collect from this person and then send them to the custom thank you page, which will be our confirmation page. And then our automation will be to register for the event. And this is why when I'm creating a sequence or a pipeline of any of these kind of things, I'm usually opening multiple tabs. Also, another reason why I like to do this where I have multiple screens. So on my computer, I have several screens so we can have this all open at once, because it all kind of ties together and we want to make sure that we have all of these pieces put together the way that they need to be. So first of all, I want to unselect this. We want to have our thank you page and we need our event. So I'll open another tab. We'll set this up and we'll go to events and we'll create a new event, which will be live webinar. Simple, set our date and time, and apply. Doesn't really matter what it is because it's for an example, and click save. So now we have our event set up. We still need to do our emails before and after the event, but we can then go back to our form tab up here And when they register for this, we want to add the automation that we want to register for an event, and then we pick that webinar, what did I name that one? Live webinar sample, and then click save. So what will happen then is that anytime anybody subscribes to or opts in through this form, it'll automatically register for the event, which then will trigger the event email sequences. The reason we use event emails is because the event emails, unlike an email sequence that is triggered by the opt-in, the event emails are based off of the date and time. So we want to do that for this particular case because if they're opting in a week in advance, they're on a completely different schedule versus someone who opts in an hour before the webinar. So we want to make sure that the timing of the emails are based off of the date and time of your webinar as opposed to when they register. So if you do an email sequence, then it'll be when they opt in. So that's a completely different scenario. Now, what we might want to do too is add a tag or any of those other types of automations if you want to while we're in here. And then of course we want to send them to a custom thank you page. So we'll open another tab and then we can go to our pages, create a new page, clone our template page, or in this case, because I'm just getting started, I can clone the webinar registration page and then I can start editing from there, where what we'll do is change the details, and we want to make this the webinar confirmation page. And I like to hide this one from search engines because we don't want to worry about our SEO and sharing because it's just a confirmation page, and then click save. We can go back and edit after the fact, but right now I'm setting up the different elements of the pipeline. Okay. Then what we're going to do is we go back to our form. We're going to add the webinar confirmation page as our thank you page that they're redirected to as soon as they opt in. So we click save here, and then we can go back into our design on our registration page and we can add our form, which is the webinar. I think it was live webinar. Oh, it was a webinar sample. Okay, so now we have our form in here. We can then add it to our two-step opt-in if we want to as well. All of those kind of things as far as design. So, you know, that's a whole separate discussion on the design of a webinar or registration page. But essentially what we want to do here is we want to get as much engagement as possible, build the value of the webinar that you are presenting. Maybe have a basic outline, some takeaway points of what they're going to learn in the event and in the webinar, those kind of things. And make it super easy. Lots of call to action buttons, so we can add a call to action button up here in our header so that you make it super easy for them to register for the webinar. And then this would go to the two-step opt-in pop-up, which then again we add the editing and stuff to that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that right now simply because that's just subjective based off of your scenario on how you want to do the designs, but this is just showing you the various elements that we need to create inside Kajabi to put all this together. So if you remember from our pipeline, and we can go into another tab and I'll bring that up for you to see again. We can go to pipelines. So we now have our registration, we have our opt-in form, we have our confirmation page, we have our event created, and theoretically, hopefully you already have your sales page and checkout set up for whatever product that it is that you're wanting to sell while you're on the webinar. So then we simply then have those links added to our email sequence. So now the next piece that we have is putting this all together in a pipeline and then putting in the live event portion. So what we do for the live event, it kind of depends on what you're using for your hosting. If you're using Zoom, which is the easiest probably I wouldn't say the easiest, it's probably the simplest and the most economical, because you don't have to purchase. You can do a free version of Zoom and just use a Zoom meeting and use that for your webinar presentation. That makes it the kind of like the entry level version of doing a live webinar. It works out really well. The difference between doing like a paid Zoom webinar is you get a little bit more analytics. You can kind of see, you know, of the registrants, who attended, who didn't. Some of those kind of things are super handy. It just kind of depends on your goals and what you're hoping to accomplish with the webinar, and some of the email follow-up sequences and strategies that you're implementing. So if you're using a third-party software like Webinar Jam or Easy Webinar, or some of those other specifically webinar software type applications, then we can just get that login link from the application, whether it's Zoom or from Webinar Jam or any of these others, and then we add that into our email sequence. So if we go back up here under our events, that's where we can add an email. Of course, we want to have our at time of registration email, where we say you're registered, and then in here we would have our information about the webinar, kind of reiterate what it is that they're going to learn, and then have a button or a link. I like to use buttons because it kind of colors up the page. We can also, of course, do images and GIFs or GIFs, or however you want to pronounce those. We can add all of those elements to these emails. So we have at time of registration, then we will have our before. So this is why we like to have at before the event. I like to use events, because here we can actually break this down into maybe a day before. We can have an email, and then we can also do one that is an hour before. So right before the email, we can actually, or right before your webinar, you can actually have an email that's saying, we're getting ready to start, we're firing up the cameras, getting ready to deliver and give you some incredible information in this webinar. I can't wait to see you there. Set aside all of your other stuff, put the kids in front of the TV with a movie so you won't be interrupted, since everybody's kind of still at home or working in various scenarios. So, you know, that's where you can word in your email those kind of invitations based off of your branding and your voice to then remind them to show up. From a strategic standpoint, remember, we don't want to feel like you're hounding them. Too often when I'm talking with clients, they'll say, well, I don't want to be inundating their inbox with emails too much. Here's the thing. There is so much noise out there, and you're competing with a lot of other marketing and messages and responsibilities that they have, and time that they have to other tasks that they need to spend in their day. And so it's really, really important, especially on something like a webinar, where we want to really build that value and make it where they want to take time out of their day to attend this webinar. You will find that you'll have a much higher ratio and better analytics of people who show up to your webinar when we engage with them more. Because remember, if they see that email from you, they don't necessarily have to open it, and they can delete it, but at least when they see the email and they see it's from you and you have a really engaging subject line, one more day till the webinar where we'll show you how to solve your problem, whatever that problem is, it's still top of the mind awareness. It's still a touch point. It's still coming into their brain of recognizing your name and reminding them of the scenario. So we want to make sure that we're being consistent with them and still adding value inside that email, so that it maybe have some tips or some reminders, or here's a workbook to download prior to, so that you can have maximize the time that we spend together, you know, those kind of things. So that's what we're doing here. And then what you're doing is, in these emails, is that we'll either add a button or a hyperlink to the Zoom meeting link that you have created. or your other software, whichever you're using. So if it's Zoom, and remember too, what we always want to do is think about what might be some potential stumbling blocks that could stand in the way of them attending the webinar. So one stumbling block, of course, is Zoom. If you're using Zoom and the person who is attending your webinar may have not used Zoom yet, it doesn't hurt to include a little bit of instructions in your emails prior to the event to say, we will be attending our webinar via Zoom. If you have not downloaded the Zoom app yet, be sure to do so prior to the event so that you can make sure that you can get logged in without any issues and miss the beginning part of the webinar. Those kind of things. So you'll have some basic instructions. The same thing with Webinar Jam. A lot of times it will require a plugin or some type of download to be able to fully engage and be a part of the webinar. So you can include those kind of verbiage in your emails to make it super simple and super easy for them to remember that it is a date and time that they have committed to, and to actually show up, and then when they try to click on it, that it's easy for them to engage. So another thing you can do is include a calendar and add it to your calendar. I'll create another video on how to do that, where you can have calendar reminders that can pop up and add it to their calendar immediately. So those are some of the things that we definitely want to do when you're setting up your emails prior to the event. And then after the event, we'll want some emails where we might have some after the event emails. And again, these after the event emails are going to be your follow-up sequence. Now there's two ways of doing this in Kajabi, because one of the things right now that is I hear a lot is that unfortunately as of right now, event emails don't give you as much analytics as your email sequences do. Definitely hoping that changes, and there's been a lot of comments with Kajabi with their design team to improve upon that particular piece of the event emails, is to get some better analytics. So one of the things you can do is your after event emails you could do as a sequence where it's triggered by the event itself. So you can have where when the event is complete, then they subscribe to the email. So that would be one option that we can do, because we can do that here inside the event itself. We would just simply go to our edit on the event and then add automation, and that would be to subscribe to email sequence. The only challenge on this one is that it's when the event is registered. So then there again, we don't really have a way of timing it from the actual date of the event itself. So you want to just kind of think about, these aren't necessarily going to be the day after or a week after. So honestly, I mean, from my perspective, a lot of times it's a lot easier to just forego the analytics and make sure that it's timed more effectively, where we have after the event, might be one day after, I can send them the replay in case they missed it, and then start a sequence for the next 2 weeks. Typically is what I like to say, is about 2 weeks you want to have regular touch points while they're still semi warm, as a warm market, to be able to engage with them further and invite them to whatever offer that you have. Okay, so that is in a nutshell the elements that we're putting together. So we now have our registration, our form, our confirmation page. Then you'll have set up your emails prior to and after. You may want to have a replay page that you create. The nice thing about a replay page is that replay page can be elements of a sales page that encourages them to purchase. And then we have our Zoom or whatever other event, you set that up in your third-party software. So now what we want to do is we're going to go to pipelines, and we're going to create a blank pipeline, because we want to take all these elements we've just created in Encore, and we're going to put this in the webinar pipeline. And when you're creating a blank pipeline, it's basically just creating one blank page. So normally what I do is, the first thing I do is I just delete that page. unless you want to use it for something else, but it's a pipeline. So first of all, this blank page is a Premiere page. So first of all, I remove it from the pipeline, and then I go back and delete that page. Now, the first thing we want to do is add a page, and we're going to use an existing landing page, and we're going to do our webinar registration page. And you notice that when we put in the webinar registration page, it automatically pops up the form and the automations that are attached to that form. So if we want to edit either of these, we can do it from here inside the pipeline. And then it also has pulled in our event, because we have the automation to register for the event. So now we have our event, which will have our emails prior to and after. So if we want to edit that, we can do that now from inside the pipeline. Then what we do is we add the other elements of this pipeline. So let's add another page, which is then our confirmation page. And you can just continue on with the other pages that you've created. So if you've created now your replay page, you can add that. If you want to add your sales page here, you can. If you want to add your offer here, you can. Although if you have multiple offers, you don't necessarily need to, because those are all on the sales page, and so you can edit from there. Because it only allows one offer to the pipeline. And remember, it's not meaning there's only one offer in the pipeline. It's just that it's attached to this folder to make it easier for you to visualize and stay organized on the various aspects of what is inside this particular pipeline. It's also helpful if you have analytics and you're wanting to go into your stats and see what offers are off of that particular pipeline. Okay, so that in a nutshell is creating a basic pipeline for your live webinar. Now remember, there's a lot of different ways that we can go about this. A lot of it will depend on which platform that you're using as a third-party platform, whether it's any of these others that I mentioned. YouTube Live is going to be a little bit different, and it is the one that is one of my personal preferences. It's a little more advanced to set up. It's not difficult. It's just going to take a few extra steps and some customization. But one of the reasons why I like using the YouTube Live version is that we host it inside one of our Kajabi pages, which can help a little bit with, of course, your analytics on how much time people are spending on your site, visits to your site, some of those kind of things, as well as it's in YouTube. So it helps on those analytics. So you have some of the YouTube analytics, you have the commenting option. So there are just a few things along those lines that makes it kind of handy depending on the style of webinar, and how you want to set it up, and your software, your technology understanding. Because if you're using the YouTube Live version, I do recommend that you use some type of live streaming software, because it does make it a little bit more professional and easier to have it come across the way that you want it to. So those are a few things that we'll talk about in the video where we talk about YouTube Live for webinars. But this particular video is specifically to walk through just the basics of the webinar pipelining and setting that up. And remember, all you need then from the live standpoint is your date and time, setting up the event, and then having links to that event in your event emails prior to the event, and then after the event we'll have links to your replay page. So that's essentially in a nutshell the key and core concepts of the live pipeline, for a live webinar pipeline. So that in a nutshell is how you make a webinar pipeline inside Kajabi. Pretty simple, right? I mean, you can use the template or you can create your own and then drop it into a blank pipeline template and just follow it that way, and then use Encore. So regardless of the way you do it, and regardless of the third-party software that you use for your live actual webinar presentation, the concepts, the strategies, the core goals behind it are pretty much going to be the same. If you're interested in learning more about our Digital CEO Pro Academy, this month we did dive deep into webinars themselves, and then every month we talk about another topic on marketing and running an online business. Be sure to check that out at my website at striveforsavvy.com. If you have any questions about creating a live webinar, feel free to put them in the comments below. I'll do my best to respond quickly and help you out as much as you want. If you have another video that you would like me, or a question about Kajabi that you would like me to create a video on, feel free to also put that in the comments. And we'll see you on the next video, where I will be talking about the live webinar using YouTube Live. We'll see you there.